Hi. So this is our second lecture on classes in Python. So in this lecture, we are going to talk about a new concept in object-oriented programming in Python. It's called inheritance. In the first lecture, we gave some introduction about classes in Python. So here we are going to discuss a more advanced concept, inheritance, as it is evident from its name that we are going to inherit some kind of features from one class to the other class. For example, if you have defined one class and this class has some attributes and some methods, and then you need to define another class, and that class is going to have the same attributes and feature as the previous class. So you don't have to define these methods and feature from scratch in your new class. You can use the methods and attributes defined in the previous class in the new class. For example, let's say if you have in Pakistan we have NADRA. It's a National Database Registration Authority. So it has some information about everyone like name, age, date of birth, and address, etc. And we have another department. It's called income tax. So income tax is going to so the job of the income tax department is to collect or have the information of their taxpayer. But they are also going to have some profile information of the taxpayer like name, age, and address, etc. And they are going to get that information from NADRA. So they are not going to create their own database. So this is the concept of inheritance. So they are going to inherit profile of each person from NADRA and use that in their income tax department. So this is what we are going to do today in this class. So let's construct a basic class, and the name of the class is NADRA. Okay, so in order to follow this lecture, you must watch my previous lecture. Otherwise, you won't be able to follow the concept we are going to discuss here. Okay, so this is a NADRA class. NADRA means National Database Registration Authority. So in this class, we are going to have some basic information of every individual. For example, their name, age, and address. So let's keep just three variables here just to make it simple. This NADRA class has only three attributes, which are name, age, and address. As we talked about in previous class, how we construct a class. The first thing the class is you are going to have is a constructor that is going to initiate your attributes or define your attributes of the class. So we define a function starting with two underscores and with initiate, and then again two underscores, and this method always starts with self. And I have explained that in my previous lecture. So it has three attributes: name, age, and address. Now let's make these variables as official attributes of this class. For that, this is how we define. Every attribute has to be preceded by self. So self name is equal to name, and self age is equal to age. Similarly, self dot address is equal to address. So this is the default function which construct the class. So now let's define a new method in this class, and that method is simply going to print profile of the object. So define a new class, new function by the name of profile. It doesn't take any input except self. So this is going to simply print name, age, and address. So print name is equal to self dot name, and another line is going to be age is equal to self dot age, and the third line is going to be the address, self dot address. So here we have defined a very simple class which has three attributes and only one method, and that method simply prints the profile of the object. Okay, we can just try to use it here. So you run this here, and define an object, and that object is let's give it a name, my data, and this object is going to be an instance of this class Nadra, and we have to initiate this with three things, and name is John, and age is, let's say, 36, and address, you can have any kind of address, let's make it short, let's say it's DHA. Okay, so we have defined this we have defined my data as an object of this class. Now this object has three attributes: name, age, address, and it has one method which is profile. Let's try to use this profile method on this object. So profile, so you see that we get these lines printed, so this is the profile we get. So now let's define a new class, and that new class is going to contain information about tax. So that class is going to use this information. We don't need to construct this information from scratch in that class. So let's define that class. So class, I would call that class FBR, Federal Board of Revenue. So this is going to have the tax information, but this class is also going to have this data or the profile information about every object. So now we are going to use the information of Nadra in this class FBR. So in the concept of inheritance, this class Nadra class is called parent class, and FBR class is called child class, or Nadra class is called superclass and FBR is called subclass, or the third terminology is used, that this class is called base class and FBR class is called derived class. So in order to tell Python that now we are going to relate these two classes in such a way that Nadra is the parent class and FBR is child class, we have to put this parent class in this parenthesis. So now this FBR is inheriting all the information from this Nadra class. So if you don't write anything here, you can simply leave this empty. But Python does not allow to leave any block empty. For example, this is the block of this class Nadra. You can't leave this space empty. You have to have something here. But if for some reason you don't want to write anything here, you can simply write pass. So if you write pass, then Python is not going to give you any error, and it's just going to run like this. So in this state, we have not defined anything in the child class. So there's no difference between FBR and Nadra class, because FBR has inherited everything from the Nadra class. So we can simply use FBR class as we use Nadra class. So actually, when you run a class, Python is going to look for the constructor function to construct your class. But apparently this FBR class does not have any constructor function. So, but since the FBR class is a child class of Nadra class, so in this case, if Python doesn't see a constructor function of this FBR class, it's going to go and look for the constructor function of Nadra class or the parent class, and it's going to use that constructor function here as it is. So at this point, FBR class, there's no difference between FBR class and Nadra class. You can check this here. Let's save it and run it and see what happens. So let's construct an object, my data, of this class FBR. And since FBR is a child class of Nadra class, and the constructor function for FBR is same as the constructor function of Nadra class, so this is going to take these three arguments. So name, let's say Abdul, age is 38, and let's say address is Gulshan. So this has to be a string. Okay, so now this my data is an object of FBR class, and you can use like all methods available for Nadra class in FBR class. So my data dot profile, so you get the same answer as we got when we defined my data as an object of Nadra class. So all the attributes of this Nadra class are available here, and all the methods of Nadra class are available here. But this is not what we want to do. Otherwise, there's no use of inheritance. So your child class is supposed to have some extra information. It's going to use all the information from Nadra, but it's also going to have some additional information. So let's define a constructor function for the child class. So you start with 2 underscores and then this name initiate, and this takes let's say these arguments, name, age, and address. So these 3 arguments are same as the parent class, and this, in order to calculate, let's say, tax of an individual, you also need to have information about that person's income. So we are going to have one more additional variable, income. So now we have to tell Python that we are going to inherit this information from the parent class, right? So for that you have to use syntax. Syntax is to start with super. Super means this super class. So we are going to call this constructor of this super class here. So super dot the constructor is this method, and we are going to inherit these 3 attributes from the Nadra class. So we just write here name, age, and address. So but the purpose of this line is to tell this FPR class that your name, age, and address, these first 3 attributes are same as the first 3 attributes in the parent class. So we don't have to redefine these 3 lines here, because we are inheriting this information from the parent class. So when you do this, you don't have to write self here like we have written self here. Actually, the use of super is to call a method from the parent class. So super means superclass method, which is so we are calling the constructor of superclass method here. You can also use super, or you can just simply write name of the class. So name of the class is Nadra. So this is also going to work here. So you don't have to write parentheses when you write class of the name. So let's stick to super. Okay, so this class has one additional variable. So we have to make sure that this is an attribute of this class. So for that we have to write self dot income is equal to income. So now this FPR class has 4 attributes, 3 attributes from the parent class, and this is one additional attribute, income. So if you see that this line has actually replaced these 3 lines. We don't have to write these 3 lines if we write this line. Okay, now let's define some methods here. So in this class we are interested in calculating tax of an individual. So let's say the tax on income is like 1%. So define a function, and the function name is income tax, and this does not take any input except self. So it is going to return let's say 0.1. So the tax rate is 1%. So this is going to be 0.01 multiplied by the amount, and the amount and the income, and the income is self dot income. So for this FPR class we have all these things available, but we have one additional method in this FPR class. So now let's try to run it and see how we can use it. So save it and run it. So let's define a new object. Let's call it my tax as the object of this class FPR. And remember, FPR takes 3 arguments. So first argument is let's say name. So name is John, and third argument is age, let's say 30, and the other argument is address. Let's say address is DHA, and fourth argument is income. So let's say this is the income. So when you run it, so you have defined an object myText, which is an object of the data type FPR, or the object of the class FPR. So what are the things available for this myText? So myText has now 4 attributes: name, age, address, and income, and it has two methods. One method is income text and the other method is profile. Let's try to use that. So my text dot income text, so this is going to give me this value 0.01% of the income. So this is okay, there is an error here. So there was a spelling mistake. This is income text, E was missing, so you get this much amount. So this amount is the income tax. But similarly, you can also print the profile. Profile function is defined here in the parent class, but since the child class inherits all the methods, so you can simply use it my text dot profile, so you get the same profile. Okay, so now let's define a new method here, and that method is going to add some extra information in the profile. So we are going to modify this profile function, but we are going to use the same name as we have used here. The name of the function is profile, so we are going to use the same name here, and let's see how this works. So define profile self. So in this new profile, we are going to have all these 3 lines, but we are going to add one additional line, and that additional line is, for example, it could be anything, but in this case we can add one extra line about the tax paid by the user. So instead of repeating these 3 lines here, we can use this function here. We can call this function here. So this function is the profile function is of the class Nadra. So if I want to use this function profile, it must precede by the name of the class to which it belongs. So Nadra dot profile self. So you have to make sure that you pass this self argument here. So this Nadra dot profile is going to call this function here, and this function simply prints these 3 lines. So we are going to get these 3 lines here, but now we are going to add one more line, and that one more line is the information about the tax paid. So I can print here tax paid this year. So how much tax we have paid? So this function calculates the tax. So instead of recalculating this amount here, you can simply call this function here. When you call this function here, you are going to get this value, which has been assigned to this return keyword. Okay, so for that, again, like we have used the profile function here, method has preceded by the name of the class. Similarly, we can use this income tax method of the FPR class. So you have to start with the FPR, which is name of the class, and then the class method, which is income tax, and make sure to pass this self argument here. So this is going to print this line, the tax paid this year, and the next thing you get here is the value, and this value is this value, which is returned by the function. Now let's save it and see how this works. So now we have 2 functions here. So this profile function is available to FPR, and this profile function is also available to FPR. But when you define an object of the data type or object of the class FBR, then when you use this profile function, Python is going to run this profile. It's not going to run this method. When we have 2 functions of the same name, and one function in the parent class and one function in the child class, then the function of the child class actually override the function in the parent class. So let's see how this works. So we are going to save it and run it. Now let's define an object of this class, same as we defined before. So my text is an object of FPR. So now let's try to print the profile. So my text dot profile. So this is going to print a new profile where the first three lines are the previous lines, and we got this additional line uh, which has been added to this new profile function. But if you use this profile function for some object which is an object of the parent class, then you're going to get this profile. So this profile function has no effect on the profile function of the parent class. Let's try to see that. So I define an object, my data is equal to Nadra, and let's have this John 30 and DHA. So this takes only 3 inputs. Now let's print the profile of this object. So my data dot profile. So my data is an object of the parent class. So when you use this method on this object, you're going to get this profile. When you run it, you see that you get your previous profile. So the point is two functions with the same name, one function in the parent class, the other function in the child class. Then the child class function is going to override the parent class function if it is used on an object of the child class. So far we have discussed how to define parent class and how to use child class. You could have two independent classes and you can use some feature of one class in the other class, and that is not going to be inheritance. In inheritance, actually you inherit everything from the parent class in the child class. But if you have two independent classes, you can use some attributes or method of one class in the other class. Let's see how this works. So in this class, Nadra has taken information from FPR has taken information from Nadra class and it is using in this class. Now let's say FPR also wants to know some information about your bank account. So they are not interested in other details of your bank account. They just want to know what is the amount you have in your bank account and how much profit you are getting on your total amount, so that they can incorporate that data in while calculating the total tax that you have to pay. So the bank account is going to be an independent class, and we are going to use only one method or one attribute of that class in FPR class. So we are not inheriting anything. It's not child and parent relationship now. Let's define this here. I just want to make one point here that if you have parent and child class, then they have to be defined in same file, and the parent class should come first and the child class should come later. Okay, now let's define a new class. The name of the class is, let's call it bank account. To make it simple, let's say this bank account has only two attributes. So def double underscore initiate double underscore, and the first variable has to be self, and then you have name, and let's say the second is amount. And let's define these attributes. Self dot name is equal to name, and self dot amount is equal to amount. And suppose that this has only one method. So the function that we are going to define now is going to calculate your total amount after adding a profit to it. So I would call this function balance. So this is this is my bank balance after 1 year. So self, and here I'm going to return. So I get 10% profit, so I have to return 1.1 multiply by this amount, self dot amount. So if you're getting 10% profit after 1 year, then this is going to be a total balance after 1 year. So what this FPR class wants to know, that what is the total balance in your account. next year so that they can incorporate that data while calculating the total tax you're supposed to pay. So now this class bank account is completely independent class. It has no relation with the another class. So if I want to use any attribute or any method of this class in some other class, let's say in FPR class, then I have to define object of this class here. Like normally we define, for example, if I have to define object of this bank account class, I would say that my, let's say, bank is equal to bank account, and then I'm going to pass two arguments here to initiate or to construct an object of this class. Similarly, if I want to use this bank account class or some method of this bank account class, let's say I want to use this balance method of bank account class here. So first of all, in the constructor function, I have to define an object of this bank account. So I will define an object and I would call that object assets, my total assets. And this assets is actually an object of the bank account class, so I have to write the same way like I have written here. Since this is going to be an attribute of FBR class, so we have to precede this by self, and name of the attribute is asset, and that attribute is going to be an object of this bank account class. So I have to say bank account, and I have to initiate this bank account with two inputs because it takes two inputs, name and amount. So name I'm going to take from here, the same name that we are using here, this name. So this name, it has to be used like starting with self dot name, and here I can insert any kind of amount that my bank account could have. So this is my amount. So now this self, this asset is an attribute of FPR class, but this attribute is an object of the bank account class. If you want to use this object, you have to use in a way that we normally use an object. Okay, so now let's see how we can use it. So again, this asset is an attribute of FBR class, but at the same time, this asset is an object of bank account class. And this bank account has two attributes, name and this amount. So this asset is also going to have two attributes, name and amount. And for this assets, we can use this method because this asset is an object of this bank account class. Okay, let's see how we can use it. So we run it and then we define an object of FBR class. So this is how we define an object of FBR class. Now this FBR class has an additional attribute assets. So this my tax object now has one additional attribute, that is assets. But this assets itself is an object of the bank account class. So in turn, it also has two attributes. So let's try to use it. My tax dot assets. Then assets itself has one attribute, that is amount. So you can call that like this. So you see that you're going to get this amount here. Similarly, you can call the method here. The method is balance. So it's going to tell you the balance, total balance of after 1 year. So you got this amount which is defined here. Now let's use this new attribute, which is an object of the bank account class, to redefine your income tax. So let's define a new function here that is going to calculate yearly tax you're supposed to pay. This was just income tax you are paying on your salary or your income, but you may have some properties, some additional bank balance, and you're supposed to pay the tax on those things as well. So let's define a function, and that function is, let's give it a name, yearly tax. So yearly tax takes only one input, self, and so let's define a variable here which is going to have the total tax. So let's call it tax. So the total tax is going to be the tax on your income, which we are calculating here, and some tax on your total amount you have in your bank account. So let's say you are supposed to pay 2% on your total amount you have in your bank account. So we are going to calculate 2% of this amount. So first, so we have to sum these two amounts to get our total tax. So this income tax is a function or method defined in FPR class. So we can simply use it preceded by the class name FPR income tax, and you have to pass this self. So this statement is going to give you this value, which is returned by this function. And in this amount, we have to add 10% of this amount. If you are assuming that we have to pay 10% of 10% amount of our total balance as a tax. So okay, now we have to add here the 10% amount, 10% of the total bank balance we have, and this is the function that returns 10% total amount of the bank balance. So we have to use this function here. And how do we use it? So remember, we have defined these assets and as an object of this bank account. So we can use this object to access this function from this class, bank account class. So I will use self dot assets, and for assets we have this function balance. We will simply use this here, and the balance returns the total amount in our bank account, and we have to take 10% of this amount, that is 0.1 multiplied by the total amount. So this is going to give us the total tax, income tax plus tax on our bank balance. So let's try to use it here. So you save it and then run this file and define an object of this FPR class. So object of FPR class, let's say we defined it as we have defined before many times. So my tax is an object of FPR class. Now for my tax I have many functions available. For example, I have function which calculates just income tax, function which prints profile, we have function which calculates the total tax, total yearly tax. So let's try to use this new function on this object, my tax dot yearly underscore tax. So we get this total tax. So this is how you can use attributes or method available in one class in the other class. So in this lecture we have discussed many concepts. So let me just summarize those concepts. We have learned how to define a parent class and a child class, and how to use attributes of parent class and child class, and then how you can use if there are two independent classes which have no relationship of parent or child, how we can use some attributes or method of one class in the other class. So these were some basic concepts of inheritance. So in the next lecture, I'm also going to discuss few more examples of inheritance. So hope to see you by then. Thank you.